So I'm a Southland born and bred person. Lived here the majority of my life. I had a year at Otago Uni while finishing off a commerce degree. My wife and I, when we first got married, lived in Canada for a couple of years and managed to experience some North American harness racing while we were in Toronto for 24 months. But found my way back to Southland, and Pauline and I were married at that point in time and lived in the town for a very brief period. Pauline was off a farm at Oamaru, so we were pretty keen to get some acreage, and managed to find a 10-acre block which grew over time to 25 acres plus a further 10-acre lease block. So yeah, here we are today. The background to breeding for me is my grandfather on my mum's side was a hobby trainer of harness horses, and I used to hang around his stable after school and on holidays and other occasions. But my dad also worked in the totalisator in Southland, and so I was one of 4 boys, and myself and my brothers used to go to the races with Dad on a consistent basis, both thoroughbreds and harness racing. And when I first got to know Pauline, her family are quite deeply involved in horses and harness racing. Pauline's mum is a Dalgety, she's Jim Dalgety's sister. And so early on in the piece I went to the yearling sales with John and Myrtle McCarthy, Pauline's mum and dad, and Pauline's mother had been a breeder for quite a number of years. So I got a taste of the yearling sales, and I thought, hey, this is pretty cool, and thought one day I wouldn't mind being a vendor and participating in selling harness horses. The name Denario Breeding came about because Pauline was teaching Latin at high school. She was originally attracted to teaching the younger kids, but ended up at James Hargis. We had 4 children, and our kids all went through James Hargis High School, and so she started teaching languages at James Hargis, and one of those was Latin. And we had a conversation in bed one night early on in the piece of saying, well, can we not have a brand that identifies our breed as we go forward to try and get some mileage out of the origin of the horse? And I said, what's Latin for money? And she said, I think she came out and said it was denarius with a US, and I said, oh, that doesn't sound that good. Well, I said, what's the plural of that? And she said, I think it's denario. So I said, oh, that'll do. And I said, how about cash flow, and we'll call it Flow Denario. And that was one of our very early horses that we actually bred, a safely kept mare, who was a half-sister to fake Denario, but we kept her and raced her, and she won one race and then broke down, and we started breeding from her, but then the name carried on from there. Denario Breeding put its first yearling through the sales back in 1991 or 92, I can't remember exactly. So we're either 20 years or 21 years coming up. We've sold consistently through the sales, other than 1 year where we only had 1 yearling and we decided to go on a Caribbean cruise. And we're pleased we did that, because shortly thereafter COVID occurred in the world. Yeah, well, we jumped out of the gate pretty quickly. The second year we sold a fake left horse called Fake Denario, and he headed into Stephen Reed's barn and ended up winning the New Zealand Yearling Sales 3-year-old Colts and Geldings race final in Auckland, and then Reedman took him across to the Breeders' Crown in Aussie, and he won the 3-year-old final over there, and then subsequently was sold to America. So he earned about $225,000 in Australasian earnings, and over in America he really made a mark for himself. He ran 148.4 in a age gelding event and took a world record, and earned over $500,000 US in addition to his 200 odd K in New Zealand. So look, he was a really handy racehorse. And we thought it was going to be easy from there on in, and it certainly wasn't. we bred another quite nice horse out of that fake Denario line called Spiro Denario, who won 10 races, and he participated in the Jewels in his 3-year-old year. Cran Dalgety trained him. And then, look, we had a reasonable patchy period where probably we weren't breeding to the right quality of stallion. Things were a bit more hectic on the family front, and I had my head down a wee bit in my full-time job, but look, we learned a few constructive lessons and ended up getting back into better quality families, and more recently we've probably had a bit more success. We bred a Better's Delight mare who got injured and didn't race, and then we started breeding from her, and her name was Ergo Denario, and she left a nice horse that ended up in WA called Convert Denario, and he's earned over 200k and won 15 races, and a half-sister to him called Volando Denario, who's actually by Pan Pacific Flight. She's earned over 100k in Aussie and won 11 odd races. Yeah, and then we got into the Averill's Adam family and started breeding. I acquired a Presidential Bull filly at the sales that Shard Farm had in their draft. It was actually bred by Sylvia Perdue, a local horse person, and her late husband, and raced that mare with friends, and we had some great fun over 2 or 3 seasons, and she won 8 races for us, and we had a few trips to Christchurch and raced some of the better 3-year-olds. And she ran second, an unlucky second in the Southern Oaks. We perhaps Dexter Dunn outdrove us that day, actually. I'm not saying he had the better horse, but he was the smarter driver. And yeah, so we had some excellent times spinning around with her, and then started breeding from her, and we acquired her mother, and started getting a few sisters to She's a Bull, and we've started breeding from that family as well as the fake Denario family. And then more recently we acquired a North American bred mare who just purely by luck ended up being the half-sister to the 2- and 3-year-old colt and gelding of the year in the States in the last 2 seasons, a horse called Perfect Sting by Always Be Mickey. So we think we've got some good blood there that we can improve on, hopefully. We've got a 3/4 sister to Perfect Sting who's with Brett Gray's stable, and she qualified last season, and hopefully we'll be at the races before the end of March. We've got an Art Major filly out of that same American mare, Want a Piece of Me, who's now with Regan Todd, I should say. Regan Todd in Canterbury, and hopefully she's going to make the grade as well. So lot 349 at the sales in February of this year will be a Sweet Lou lad out of a mare called Mantis Denario. Now, Mantis Denario is a daughter of Averill's Adam, who makes her a half-sister to She's a Bull that I referred to earlier, and also some other really quality mares, Fizzy Lizzie and Averill's Quest, who Rod McKenzie trained up in Auckland. They won both around 9 or 10 races each, earned quite a bit of money. And Mantis' story is my daughter's nickname. My oldest daughter, Michaela's nickname is Mantis, so we named it after her. She's all arms and legs, was when she was a bit younger. So she used to get a bit of ribbing about being the Mantis. And we formed a syndicate to race her and sent her up to Cran Dalgety's stable. Cran qualified her as a 2-year-old filly in about February of her 2-year-old year. She won a nice trial. She went out for a period, and then she won a nice trial against 5 2-year-old colts and geldings at Ashburton. And we were hoping to line her up as a late 2-year-old, but Cran said she's tapered off a bit, and we would aim for the 3-year-old period. She worked back up at 3, and Cran gave me a call one day and just said, look, this horse will win races, but it's not going to be a classic or a really impressive horse, so it may end up costing us money to actually race her. And so we made a decision then to breed her as a 3-year-old. So this is actually the first live foal out of the Sun Beach Somewhere mare, Mantis Denario, and we're really delighted with the quality of the animal. He's a fantastic physical specimen. Like most of the Sweetloos, he's a showy type, not excessive amount of bling, but just a nice amount of white on his forehead. On type, we think that this horse is actually the best of our 3 colts in our draft this year. He's a lovely animal, and we hope he does get the fair value, and there may be a generous purchaser out there who's prepared to pay slightly more just because of the cause they know that the proceeds are going to. And NZB has been great. They've swung in behind this. They're going to give it a push through their marketing channels. They're not going to charge us for the entry or the commission on the horse. And so look, we just think it's a great opportunity for even exposure to people who are not necessarily interested and focused on harness racing, to understand that there is another entertainment avenue out there that has got links back to the community, and we just think it's a win-win all round for the people who might end up purchasing this animal. Pauline does most of the handling of the horses. I'm pretty much the feeder and the shit boy, but can I say that? But she finds that he needs a wee bit of reinforcement, but once he gets the requirement, he's really good to work with. And he was sensible with the videoing, which we're really pleased with, and showed himself off nicely. We think he's a great racing prospect, and hopefully he'll fetch a reasonable sum of money for the Hawthorndale Care Village. Yeah, so the Hawthorndale Care Village project really came about over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm a director on a not-for-profit organisation called Calvary Hospital Southland, and Calvary's existing facilities were getting a bit tired, and so the management and the directors had a bit of throw around brainstorming about, do we invest in the existing site or do we look at another alternative? And if we look at another alternative, do we look outside the square a bit? And the manager of Calvary Hospital, Margaret Brown, came across the concept of a new model of aged care called Te Hogway. It's a Dutch system where people live in houses or apartments in much the same way they've lived all their life. So rather than living in a large institutional type facility where you've got corridors and rooms coming off those long corridors, you've got a normal housing unit of say 6 or 7 beds in a living area, and you undertake your normal household duties, your laundry, your cooking, your cleaning. That's all done to stimulate and encourage a better quality of life for the aged individuals. And so the Calvary board decided to commission a fundraising project and do some due diligence around whether we could establish that type of facility in Southland. There is one other system like that operating in New Zealand in Rotorua, and they've found it to be really effective, but probably not as extensive as the project that we've tackled. We want to put some village infrastructure in and around the housing units, such as a CAF, a gymnasium, a hall, a small grocery shop. And so we want the residents of the village to be able to come and use those village assets and participate in a much fuller life than they would. One of the really interesting statistics is that for elderly who live in aged care homes, the average time they spend outside per day is roughly 1.5 minutes. And that's pretty pitiful when you think about how most people live during the years that they're fit and active. And for some reason, when you get to a point of your life and you get put in care, everything has to stop and things grind to a really sluggish existence. And so Te Hogway's about more stimulation, more normal living, more activity, and trying to be part of a community. So we think it's a much better system and a more effective way of caring for the elderly who deserve respect when they get to that stage of their life. So the project's, as I said, it's been underway for 4 or 5 years. We've been actively fundraising for the last 2 years. We started with a target of about 33 million. It's been pushed out to 35 million because building costs have gone up during that time, and COVID hasn't really assisted that. But we're well down the path. We've got pretty much 95% of that 35 million has been committed, either in the form of contributions from donations, or we've lined up a debt package as well, and some assistance from a local family, Joss and Scott O'Donnell, who are part of the Richardson group and the Richardson family connection. They've backed it significantly and assisted us, but we had a $6.5 million fundraising target, of which we've raised a bit over $4.5 million. So we're in the home stretch to get the last couple of million raised to be able to get construction underway and get some building done. And so Pauline and I thought it'd be a great way to try and lift the profile of the project and perhaps reach out a bit further beyond Southland through nominating one of our yearlings for the proceeds to be directed towards the project. www.thehawthorndale.co.nz. There's a link there which allows the public just to go in and make a donation straight through a credit card payment or a direct payment option. And there's donation forms there. The Hawthorndale Care Charitable Trust is a registered charity, so for every dollar you donate, you get 33 cents in the dollar back. Look, we just think it's an outstanding cause that potentially has got the ability to reset how we care for the elderly in New Zealand. If we can get this project up and running and demonstrate that it's a superior method of caring for our elderly, then we'd like to think that the government and the Ministry of Health will take heed and start thinking about how do we adopt this model on a more extensive basis across the country.